an interesting webinar for a lot of reasons, because I think it will challenge in many respects your value systems and what you believe is important for the types of firms that you work in and your lifestyle within firms and a lot of those related topics. I'll do the presentation, and then after the presentation, I'll take a short break and then we'll take questions. I do have a cold today. Hopefully this will be okay, but I'm sorry, I'm a little difficult to understand. Okay, so there's interesting, one of my favorite movies is Apocalypse Now. It's a war movie about the Vietnam War. And the story is essentially about a group of soldiers that travel down a river to kill a colonel that's played by Marlon Brando. It's one of his more famous roles, who's allegedly gone insane. And the movie follows Army Captain Benjamin Willard, who's played by Martin Sheen, as he leads his crew down the river to find Kurtz to kill him. And the early part of the movie, when it starts, is disturbing. It's Willard's on the verge of insanity himself. He's just returned from a tour of war, and he's alone in a hotel room, and he's drunk, and he can't stand. And then he punches his fist into a mirror and cries out. It's a disturbing scene. And the gist of it is that he really wants to get back in the jungle and fight. And he can't, when he's not fighting and not part of this kind of war and this craziness, he's actually crazy. And so he needs to return to the jungle and go to war. And war is normal, and everyday life is actually intolerable and drives him mad without that input, because his nervous system and everything is just so jacked up. So he soon meets the crew that he's going to be traveling down the river with, and the crew's happy and fresh, and they're having a good time, and they're hunting for mangoes, and just everything's a nice time. But by the time they spend several days journeying down the river, soldiers that started off the tour very happy and normal have either gone insane or become very damaged, or some of them are dead. And it's interesting because they kind of contrast Willard the whole time, who was crazy at the beginning when he was alone, but now that he's in this crazy situation, he looks very calm and collected and normal and rational, and so it's very interesting, the contrast. And so when he meets Kurtz, he quickly realizes he's insane. He's been busy killing random people and littering the area with severed heads, and Kurtz has become a godlike figure and lords over the natives of the jungle, and he's succeeded in terms of getting power and that sort of thing. And then when Willard speaks to Kurtz about his behavior, Kurtz responds that one cannot have a moral judgment in wartime because it's judgment that defeats us. So I like this contrast because in many law firms, and especially large law firms, it can be akin to going to war. Find attorneys that are there, and there's a reason for that to discuss in a minute. But you'll find attorneys there all day on Sunday and late in the night on weekdays. And then even when they're out socializing at various places, they're busy working as well. I remember going to children's birthday parties and would often see attorneys literally in the middle of the party marking a brief up on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon. When I'm on airplanes, I often see attorneys working and studying, and for the most part, a lot of attorneys are working, especially law firm attorneys, are working all the time, and they're addicted to it, maybe, or work is the only normal that they understand. They're almost the soldiers that I'm talking about, Kurtz and so forth. So there's some practice areas that you can leave at home to some extent, which would be patent prosecution, tax, and ERISA, for example. However, in general, once you start practicing law, you're part of the fabric of something much different than the rest of the world. You're a group, you join a group of people that are never going to be the same, especially if you're at a very competitive firm. It changes you, and you're just different. And really what that means is that you're in a group that's fighting for one side, and you have to choose how hard you're going to fight. And based on how hard you're willing to fight will be the quality of firm you end up at. For a lot of attorneys, the real world is much different. A lot of attorneys will have issues with maintaining family relationships, marriages, being good parents, and often will go back to and I'm not saying this in a positive way, but find more comfort in the craziness of working very hard in a law firm, and then they may feel in a lot of their personal and family relationships, and which is unfortunate, but that's what feels normal to them. And they really need, in order to feel comfortable and normal, they need to work. If they're not really engaged, they feel like they're doing something wrong. The culture of the firm may also reinforce that. and spending time with their children or families feels less normal to a lot of them than maybe sitting in an office alone working on something. Even recreational activities are often abnormal, and work is safe because if you're billing hours, you're safe at work, you're making progress, and this makes you feel safe in your firm and okay. And if you take your eye off the ball and stop working, you won't be safe. You might miss something or forget to do something, and then you could be in trouble very quickly. And it's almost like being in war, because if you make one screw up or one mistake, lots of people could be hurt, including your clients and your fellow attorneys. Again, many attorneys have a lot of problems with their social lives and their home lives and because of the stress of the work. They don't all have it, but certainly probably not even a substantial majority of them have it. But I would say far more than 50%. And I would say at the largest firms, I think those numbers are even higher. And that's because essentially in a very serious war. They're fighting with opposing counsel. They have to report to multiple clients and judges. They're judged harshly by their coworkers and superiors, and they're often evaluated only based on the number of hours they bill, collections, and so forth. And these pressures can build. And a lot of attorneys become quite paranoid and on edge in order to maintain all this. And they bring this to their families. This mentality that you need to be a good lawyer in a law firm doesn't stop the second you walk away from the firm. It just goes on when you go home and so forth. And attorneys know that there's dangers of losing their jobs if they don't speak and are bringing business. And they may also they're responsible all the time for things. And this could have a big impact on the attorney's career. Again, like in many aspects, going to work in a law firm can be akin to going to war. You either accept it's your job and embrace it, or you reject it. And if you're going to be a warrior, you need to really embrace this role completely. And this is what partners in the largest law firms do. It's what you have to do. You can't decide to go to war and only fight 50%. If you do this, you will die and you will fail. People that aren't engaged in anything don't do well. You can't be an athlete and only give 50% effort. You can't be an attorney and expect to succeed if you only give 50% effort or not your best effort. And especially when you're fighting opposing counsel about any issue or in a transaction, you're going to lose if you aren't on top of things. And there's lots of, it's almost can be akin to thinking about like children in a playground. And what happens is there's ones that are very strong and push other kids around, and there's ones that aren't and get taken advantage of. And it's the same thing in the legal profession. There are law firms where things like lifestyle are emphasized over winning. Now, this is what we're talking about today, are lifestyle firms. And I want just to make everyone aware that if something really legitimately is a lifestyle firm, then where things like lifestyle are emphasized over winning or being the best attorney, that these types of firms rarely hold on to clients very long. And often they peter out and die. You can't run a very good firm based on saying things like, oh, we all went to good law schools and therefore we must be great, but then not work really good hours or really dedicate yourself to your clients and have everyone around you engaged. You can't hire people to only give 50% effort and expect the law firm to do well. And so in the law firms, the law of the jungle applies, and the weak do not survive. I understand that a lot of people, and it's very common, by the way, I talk to attorneys all the time that want to go to work in lifestyle firms, but if you're a client looking for an attorney or deciding whether to keep an attorney, would you want one that gave 50% effort and did not take your stuff seriously and that said, I don't work on Fridays, whatever? Or would you want one that believed in your case you faced was the most essential thing in the world and like the most important thing in the world when they took on your matters, and they treated it like that? And there are lifestyle firms out there. There's several of them that call themselves lifestyle firms, but typically if something is a lifestyle firm today, it probably won't be a lifestyle firm 5 or 10 years from now. The reason is because most of them that are true lifestyle firms end up going out of business because they're not providing the type of service that the clients want. Or if they don't go out of business, they change from being lifestyle firms to becoming something very different, which I'll discuss today. And And just think about what you would want if you had a business or you were in trouble and what type of attorney you would want to hire. You would want somebody that was on the winning side of things. And it's interesting for me because I've hired lots of attorneys to work for me personally and our companies. And really the quality and the dedication of the attorney is very meaningful. It's people that are engaged and really tuned in are much different types of attorneys than the ones that aren't. And you need to realize that if you're going to succeed, that if the law firm you're in is going to succeed, that being in a demanding law firm, like in terms of the quality of work and not just the hours, but the quality of work that they expect, is going to determine the clients that win and the clients that get the best service. And the clients who get the best service are going to give more work to the firm. And in transactions, whether it's litigation or transactions, that the attorneys, the best ones, are really don't miss things. They think they put in extra effort and they do well, and they work very hard to do the best quality work. And for companies, the stakes can be huge. It could be billions of dollars. And unless their attorneys have a high level of commitment, the clients will, or unless the attorneys have a high level of commitment, the clients won't get good results. And so this idea of wanting a lifestyle firm, and again, I'm going to talk about lifestyle firms, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with lifestyle firms, but you have to understand if you want to go to work for a lifestyle firm, and this is your goal, that you have to question how is that firm going to stay in business doing things based on lifestyle, because that just doesn't make a lot of sense. And so you really need to think about that. These pressure cooker atmospheres, these hard, lots of hours and expecting hard work and things, you end up creating better attorneys most of the time. It's not, there are limits to it. I don't think that people should have to pull all-nighters and that sort of thing. But for the most part, level of commitment that your firm expects, and it will make you a better attorney and will make the clients like you better and want to work with you. And so typically, I'll talk a little bit about lifestyle firms. They're typically started by people who spin off from another law firm. They may have gone to good law schools or been in another firm, but they typically will spin off from another law firm because they want to make more money, or they'll say they want fewer rules and different management, or they weren't made partner in whatever firm they were in, or they really believe that they can run a lifestyle firm. In most instances, attorneys that spin off and do start their own firm, in my experience, just were either wanted to make more money, or they didn't like being accountable to other people, or they really did want to have more control over their time and so forth. But really, in terms of a lifestyle firm, you really can't have much stability working for them. So I'll talk a little bit about that right now. So the first thing is lifestyle firms generally never stay lifestyle firms. And there's two reasons. The first has to do with using lifestyle as a recruiting tool. I've watched lots of law firms over the years start and go away. And in new law firms, especially that are spin-offs of good law firms, will often tell you that they're going to provide a really good lifestyle. And so they'll say we're a lifestyle firm. The idea is that when they say they're a lifestyle firm, they'll be able to hire people from major law firms with good backgrounds at a lower salary. And then when they talk about work-life balance and how we think that's very important and things, then the attorneys are often very interested in that. It works. And attorneys that are at major law firms or big law firms where there's a lot of demands on their time will often jump at the chance to work in law firms that promise fewer hours and less pressure and so forth. But it's generally just a recruiting tool and it never lasts. What happens is no different than any other firm. The people that work the hardest and do the best work are given the most work. And then pretty soon those people are working just as many hours for less money. So most of the time, not all the time, but the majority of the time, when I say the majority, over 80%, if you go to work at a firm that calls itself a lifestyle firm, then a couple things will happen. But one thing is generally you will get busy. And when you do get busy, your hours will still be high. There's still demands from clients. There's still, the law firm is still there to make money. And so you'll still get as much work. Many times these attorneys will be upset. They'll tell the management that they came there because they thought it was a lifestyle firm. But then what happens is then the other undercompensated attorneys that are working all these hours will start leaving. And then when they start leaving, the law firm may realize it needs to raise salaries now because people are leaving saying that there's high billable hours and we're making less money. So then the law firms start putting in minimum billable hour requirements. And then with these minimums in place, the firm's no longer a lifestyle firm. And then it starts talking about how they have really good camaraderie and upward mobility opportunities compared to big firms and that sort of thing. So it's all these things that I'm talking about, by the way, have been going on for 30 plus years, or probably longer than that. I've just watched it over and over again. It's the same thing. Like firm calls itself a lifestyle firm. It generally stops being a lifestyle firm. And then in order to stay competitive, we'll raise its salaries and then billable hour requirements. And so most lifestyle firms never stay lifestyle firms. The second problem with lifestyle firms is that the whole idea of a lifestyle law firm really ignores the reality of practicing law. So except for just a few practice areas, and again, tax, patent, ERISA, and some others, most legal work does require periods where attorneys need to work extremely hard and often for extended periods of time. So in a transaction, no detail is insignificant. And same thing in litigation. Attorneys need to be focused and committed, and this often means working very long hours. And without a high level of commitment from its members, law firms often have a very difficult time surviving because they need to provide good results to clients. And if they're not wholly focused on these matters and working hard, they're likely to end up getting the short end of the stick and their clients and harming them and just not getting repeat business from those clients. And so to stay in business and remain competitive, a law firm with a lifestyle bent generally has to get in a position where they need to be more business-like and less lifestyle-oriented. And so they will convert to that. And some law firms make this transition and become competitive, survive, but not all do. A lot of billable hours and pressures are typical at a law firm for a reason, because attorneys need to win matters for their clients. And winning could be just making sure you do a good job in a transaction or in litigation, winning. And it often requires a lot of hours. So when you think about working in a lifestyle firm, it's undoubtedly something that a lot of people aspire to, but it's not really something that I believe can ever work in the long term. It usually doesn't, especially in large competitive markets where there are a lot of people competing as hard as possible to do the best job for their clients. And that means that there's other firms competing to get their work. There's all sorts of things going on, and clients are all surrounded by attorneys who want their business. And what happens is clients will meet with other law firms, whether or not they're shopping or not, but they'll always be encountering other attorneys and law firms. And those clients may talk about their legal matters a little bit, and then they'll give the law firm, the client, the impression that their attorneys are doing something wrong or they're making mistakes. And so if you're not completely engaged and tuned in, that can be a problem. And again, in smaller towns and things, it doesn't necessarily matter as much. But once you get into larger markets, it's extremely competitive and almost impossible for most law firms to remain lifestyle firms and for very long. And then another thing to keep in mind is lifestyle firms never stay in business very long. When I was considering lateraling to a law firm early in my career, I interviewed with a genuine lifestyle firm. It was an offshoot of, I think, Melvin E. Myers, and the partners and others I met told me how they were trying to run a lifestyle firm in Los Angeles. And they paid maybe a little over half the salary of a normal law firm in Los Angeles at the time. And I couldn't believe it when I was interviewing people in the firm, and they were saying things like, there's nothing that cannot wait until Monday, and it needs to take you away from your family on the weekend. And I was stunned. And these people were serious, and they were in pretty nice offices in Century City. And I had no idea how a firm like this could stay in business. And it didn't. A few years later, I read about several partners in the law firm who made a catastrophic error in a transaction and lost a malpractice verdict of over $50 million. And which is not good. And the firm was forced to close its doors. Then I went, and they had done some work for me on some trust in the estates or will documents or something. And I had an attorney look at it later, and they said it was just some of the most basic scribbled errors that you could possibly make, it was just horrible. And these were people that I thought were very good attorneys. And so it may have been an excellent lifestyle firm, but it did poor work. And because of its lifestyle, it paid the price. And its attorneys disbanded, and a lot of them became solo practitioners and working on contract for other firms and things. And I see this again and again with lifestyle firms. So I want you to really realize that going to a firm that calls itself a lifestyle firm isn't always the safest thing to do. Being an attorney is like fighting in a war. If you go to people that aren't fighting hard, and given that they're all constantly, you're going to end up getting killed. And there's just too many pressures around you to ever take it easy. Even if a lifestyle firm doesn't make these huge catastrophic errors, they're going to likely have issues attracting us and then holding on to clients and paying salaries and keeping up with expenses. And nothing is more common than these firms just closing up because the business stops. I see these firms, they open just in LA, but in New York and other markets, they open several times a year, good ones, where people will spin off of a major law firm in the city, and then they'll open these lifestyle firms. And most of them don't make it, unfortunately. The ones that call themselves and really legitimately are lifestyle firms. The idea of getting together a bunch of people that aren't committed to practicing law and not committing is insane. Just think about that. You're going to join with a bunch of people that aren't committed to practicing law and start a firm together. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And a lot of times these firms will have very few client relationships, or maybe just one. And sometimes these attorneys will be able to take one or two clients with them when they leave and break off from a large firm and take the client with them. And it often works for some time. But once the law firm becomes overly dependent on work from the client, what tends to happen is they may initially price the work at a lower rate to bring over the client. They'll always get greedy and try to increase the rate, not always, but most of the time. And then the client will be like mad about that. And then the quality of the work will slip and it'll be below what they were receiving when they were paying a high rate at the firm they were at. And then they may lose the client. This happens a lot. If the client realizes that the attorney is overly dependent on them, they may start not negotiating the bills downward, and that can hurt. And then one client firms, and even a few client firms, often go out of business. And when the business stops, I see this one all the time too. I see it quite often, and it stops because the lifestyle firms aren't hungry enough to keep the business coming. And then another thing to understand is there's certain areas of the country that have more lifestyle firms than others. There are areas outside of major cities where where many clients would compete for business. So example here is order a pizza store. And if you order pizza in a small town, you'll get it like in an hour or so, cold and tasting like cardboard. They don't care. There's no competition, and no one else is going to do the work of operating a pizza restaurant there. This same sort of thing happens in small towns and smaller markets. There's not a lot of competition. The attorneys can do what they want. And you can find these types of firms, and there are lots of them, and that is legitimately a lifestyle firm. But the lifestyle attributes of practicing law quickly fade away when you get into larger market. One example that's funny is if you're in New York, you can order food from pretty much every country on earth anytime day or night, delivered to your apartment in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And there's so much competition, and people are working because it's a larger market. So people expect more dedication, they expect better service, and people are competitive, and businesses want to do better than other businesses so they can attract other clients. And the best firms in every area are generally not lifestyle firms. They're there and they work hard, and again, in most areas of the country have hardworking attorneys and who demand high quality work from each other and their subordinates. And more often, attorneys in smaller cities will often make dramatically less money than those in larger cities. The work they do is less critical, and they'll have different experience practicing law than attorneys in major cities. And when I was just out of law school, I worked for a federal judge in a relatively small town in Michigan, not that small, and attorneys from New York and Los Angeles and other major cities would always come to the court, and you could tell they thought they were much better than local counsel. And I was in the hall one day and I heard one of them pretending to talk like with a country accent when discussing local counsel in the hall one day. And there's just unspoken rules in the legal community that the best and most challenging work goes to attorneys in large cities. I was reading recently an autobiography, I think, of Michael Dell, and he was talking about how he was selling a company or raising money or something. I don't know what he was doing, but he was going to New York and he was using, I think, Wachtell, and he wasn't using law firm. There's a lot of really good law firms in Texas where he's from, but he wasn't using them. He was going to the best law firm he could find in New York, which for what he's doing. So that's how it is with most things. If you have a very significant legal matter, in most cases, it's going to the largest firms in the largest cities. So if General Motors has an issue, it's not going to usually hire a very serious issue. It's not going to hire a big Detroit firm. It's going to hire one in Chicago or one in LA or New York or something. And so typically the most important work goes to attorneys in large cities and competitive firms. And in other cases, law firms in less urban areas may have local clients they consistently do transactions for, and they may have a good stable of work that doesn't require them to kill themselves with every transaction. But even in smaller markets, the ones with the best reputations are most often those that work the hardest. So when I was in Detroit, there was always, that's where I clerked, and where I'm from, there's several firms there, but the hardest working one was always a firm called Hahnemann Miller. And it was the best firm, and it was also the one where the attorneys worked the hardest, and they were very proud, and they almost modeled themselves as a New York law firm because they worked so hard. And by far, they were considered the best firm in Detroit. Even in smaller markets, the ones with the best reputations are most often the ones who work the hardest. And attorneys who work the hardest generally win the most, whether it's getting the at best end of a transaction or winning a litigation case. And just think about it from your standpoint. If you were a client, you want people willing and able to fight for them, and not those who are running away from the fight. Just think about your position. If you were accused of murder, would you hire a lifestyle murder attorney that was just thinking, this is all casual, I'll give you time when I feel like it, I'm going to spend the weekend with my family, even though you have a trial coming up? This is how people expect. This is what a lifestyle firm represents to a lot of people, and it just doesn't work. There's an interesting story about John Quinn, who founded Quinn Emanuel, and this is a guy that basically, not single-handedly, because he had a lot of people helping him, but he had a vision, and a lot of that vision he was able to give to make other people believe in. But the big thing that he did is when he would meet clients, he would tell them, and he would mean it, and he wasn't making it up. He would say, if you hire me, I will eat, drink, and sleep this case, which is absolutely true. And so he would think about it, and this is the kind of meaning, I'm thinking about this when I'm going to bed. I'm thinking about it when I'm sleeping. I'm thinking about it when I'm having lunch. And this is what attorneys want. This is what clients want. And it's what you want and would want if you wanted an attorney. And so this is one of the other reasons about lifestyle firms. And then even if there was a true lifestyle firm, and there are, you need to understand that every law firm is a business. And law firms distribute money to their staff based on how many hours people work and how productive the people are that work there. And that's just how it works. And every law firm needs to pay for office space. They need to pay for salaries. They need to do an excellent job, and they need to get more and more business. And they win cases by being more intelligent and working harder than the competition. And most transactions and litigation-related cases have enough depth to them that the attorneys that are getting the best results are the ones who are looking most deeply into the issues. And so what does that mean? I'll talk about this real briefly because I think it's quite interesting. When I was maybe a third year attorney, I was working for an attorney that had never lost a case, and which is very interesting. And because he didn't do a lot of trials. He never actually lost a case. And what had happened with him, and what I learned from him, is I was working on this case where, I would work on matters with him, and he would have me go and just research them and bill hundreds of hours researching and writing memos about just these little topics, like what is the legislative history of this law? What did people say? And he would always, after pushing and asking more and more questions, he would always come up with something that was a hook that would make his client win. And it was fascinating. And I saw that with another very well-known attorney I worked with, and he did the same thing. Like one time he told me, this is the issue, and I want you to spend the entire weekend thinking about it and letting me know what you think the solutions are. And it wasn't about the law. It wasn't about anything. It was just taking the weekend to think about an issue and really thinking about it and diagramming and everything. And I did, and I didn't come up with a solution. And then there was a brilliant partner from that come over to, I think it was Quinn from Gibson Dunn, very smart guy. He was probably in that point in his early 70s. And he took a look at everything that I diagrammed and wrote. And again, it wasn't, and was able to come up with a solution that ended up saving the client, I think, $80 million or something. It was about a satellite. And so it's very interesting. So when you look at stuff deeply enough and you work hard, and in this case, they just had me think about a matter basically for the weekend that I knew nothing about. What are the different ways? Then they were able to, someone that was very smart was able to use the thoughts that I'd put together for them to solve something. And if you're overly concerned with your lifestyle, you can't look deeply into issues. And looking deeply into issues is really where the results are when you're an attorney. And if you're a good attorney, you generally care very much about the work that you're doing and you want to do a good job. And for businesses to survive, they need to provide very good service and do very good work. And that's the way it is with attorneys as well. And you need to be able to do good work. And the businesses that rely on the attorneys also need to do good work. Again, practicing law is very similar to being a combat soldier, because if you're going to consistently win and survive and get more business, you need to be committed. And the success of every law firm depends on everyone in it working very hard and generating money. And it's almost impossible to sustain a business by having the idea of like lifestyle comes first and all that. Just, it's very difficult for that to happen in a law firm. And if there's no competition, the business may last, but will never survive with competition in the market. It's just how it is. You can't come up with a lifestyle firm and just, because the market's competitive. And I just, when you give up practicing law in a firm, you generally do so because you decided you want to reject this kind of way of life and you don't want any part in it anymore. And you don't want to be committed. And so in the absence of the commitment, you leave, and it's fine. And the practice of law does require dedication, and any law firm, regardless of whether it calls itself a lifestyle firm or not, does require total commitment. And as an attorney, you're hired to protect and fight for other people. And soldiers and warriors, you need to be faced with hostile opponents. And you're really, if you're a good attorney, you're no longer part of the ordinary world. You're like, just as a soldier being shot at is not part of the normal world either. And a soldier tasked with defending someone's life or a city or a country and can't take their job in a lackadaisical and lifestyle manner. Otherwise, they're going to lose. And an attorney in a law firm either. The important thing for you to understand is there's really no such thing as a lifestyle firm. And there's also, by the way, there's nothing wrong with deciding that you don't want to be part of this warrior type of profession, at least in a law firm. It's not for everyone. And in a law firm, if you're going to survive, or if your law firm is going to survive, it's going to need to be very hardworking. And it's a very difficult lifestyle. I'm not defending how good it is. I'm not defending it, because I do think there definitely are some drawbacks to it. But I have seen a lot of attorneys quit, and I think that for a lot of people that does make sense, and to step into something less demanding, because when you're quitting the practice of law or a law firm or trying to find a lifestyle firm, really what you're doing is you're rejecting a way of life. And you may be rejecting that way of life because in your view, that's going to make you psychologically more healthy. And when the world around you appears to have gone insane. And what I mean by that is that if you don't buy into this, and you don't have to, then it may make sense for you to do something else or to go in-house. It's not, or to find a firm that maybe isn't as competitive and isn't as concerned with winning. It's just very difficult for law firms like that to survive in the long run. Okay, well, I will take a quick break, and then I'll be back in just 1 or 2 minutes. And then when I come back, I'll take questions. So thanks. Okay, so the first question is, are there more advantages for corporate lawyers and for litigation lawyers in terms of lifestyle? Yeah, I think so. There's so in corporate law, there's a couple different types of corporate attorneys, but there's people that are what are called corporate generalists. And so a corporate generalist is someone that just does a bunch of different types of corporate related work. And a lot of that is related to just keeping companies operational and not major M&A and securities and things along those lines. So yeah, I think that you can definitely many times find a lot of corporate law firms that are corporate departments that are more kind of lifestyle type related firms, more lifestyle related. That doesn't mean that you don't have to work long hours when you're in corporate, when you're in corporate firms, but at the same time, you may. The way corporate works is so in major cities and major markets, corporate tends to be very specialized. And so people do one aspect of corporate. And then when you get into mid-sized to smaller markets, then most corporate attorneys, I would say generalist. And so they work on a lot of different types of things. I did want to bring something up that I think is interesting. I used to know a corporate attorney pretty well, and I know lots of corporate attorneys, but I'm talking about a specific corporate attorney that I knew. And he was at I would say a kind of a firm that had traditionally been a insurance type firm and then had opened a corporate practice. And he'd been at a kind of a large firm and then moved over to this firm. And when he got there, he couldn't believe, and this firm he went to was more of a lifestyle type firm in a lot of respects. It was in a suburb outside of Los Angeles. And he said something I thought was very interesting. He said that, when he got there, he saw all the corporate attorneys were living this whole lifestyle thing and getting just completely screwing their clients over. They were selling businesses for a lot less than they were worth. They were making mistakes and things. And so depending on how good the corporate attorney is, a lot of times you do need to get pretty deep into transactions and understand them to do well. But in that example, that there is some danger, I think, a lot of times to that. And I don't think these attorneys knew how badly they were doing. Okay, let's see here. Next question. Okay, what companies would be considered lifestyle firms? Can you share some law firms? I don't want to name names, but a lifestyle firm is typically would be a law firm that will do things like they'll say none of our attorneys bill over 1,800 hours. They will often these days, a lot of them would allow you to work remotely. That's of course a given in a lot of firms, but remote work, I would say, but anything that's related to less face time and then less face time. Anything that's related to less face time, few hours would be a law firm that would be considered a lifestyle firm. Many times, most of the time, and a lot of times they're going to be made up of, if you're coming from like a major law firm, then a lot of times the way people will end up at these firms that call themselves lifestyle firms is they'll be made up of other people from big law firms or good law schools and that sort of thing. That's typically the easiest way to identify them. Yeah, so there are a lot of advantages to being part of a lifestyle firm. The advantages are often that culture is less competitive. The emphasis emphasis is not on money, is less on money. Excuse me, on money and more on the culture may be such that it's not tolerate people that are super competitive, but still wants to win or wants to do good work. So these are some of the advantages. One of the things that's interesting about law firms, and I think that this is actually a very important point, is law firms there are many cultures. They all have different types of cultures and things that make them unique and that are important for them as businesses. And some law firms can actually maintain that very well. They can maintain a culture of being a lifestyle firm, but the problem is as they grow, they will often, if they grow, then they often become much less lifestyle firms. And so that's one of the issues. But I think, yes, there are advantages of being part of a lifestyle firm. People are often much happier there at a lifestyle firm, but it's very difficult for those firms to survive and for them to maintain lifestyle firms, because when it comes down to it, what happens is in every firm is the people that bill the most hours and have the most clients are the ones that do the best. And the people with the most clients are always going to want to have the best people working on their matters and the most dedicated people. So if you were, and just put yourself in the shoes of a partner, for example, if you were a partner in a law firm, one of the benefits of what the services that law firms provide to partners is they hire associates and so forth for them. And so if you were a partner in a law firm and that law firm is hiring associates that are only there because it's a lifestyle place, and you have all these clients that are trying to get work done and want good work done, but your associates are all there just because it's a lifestyle firm, that's going to make it difficult for you to service them the way they want to be serviced. And so you're likely to take your business elsewhere. So this is one of the problems of lifestyle firms, is that unless everyone buys into it and is happy, then it's not going to work. But this question is, I don't know, what qualities do lifestyle firms seek in a lawyer? Lifestyle firms are typically use, I would say, what they're looking for are attorneys that they want the best attorneys they can get. And so typically the way they'll do that, they'll hire people that normally wouldn't go to work at a firm that size or that pays what they pay. And so but they'll induce them with the idea of that it's a lifestyle firm. So they're looking for the same thing everyone else is, which is the law schools and coming from good firms and that sort of thing. It's pretty funny, like I like talk to people in admissions and large firms and law school admissions and then large firms all the time. And it's funny when you talk to law schools, they all have this, they're all looking for people with a certain LSAT or grade point average. I was at a meeting with admissions people like not too long ago, and they were saying it was interesting how law schools work, that the people with the top grades or the top LSAT scores, typically people only have one or the other. And so they're really admitting two classes, or admitting one for LSATs, this is even the top 10 law schools. They're admitting one for grades. And then when you get into the best schools, and a lot of like top 1 or 2 or 3 schools, a lot of times they're doing both, but most of them there's almost 2 separate classes, and they're all looking for the same person. And it's the same thing with law firms. There are the best law firms, it's the same background types of stuff with people, and the best boutiques are looking for the same thing as well. So they just want the best attorneys they can get. And that's often the law firm you're coming from and your experience and so forth. And then many times your law school, not always your law school. This is a good question. Are lifestyle firms more beneficial for attorneys in terms of quality of life compared to law firms, compared to traditional law firms? So I think that the answer to that is yes. I think that lifestyle law firms are a lot of times more beneficial. And I think that people are often much happier in them. One thing I do notice is that in smaller markets, I think that there's a lot less turnover in attorneys compared to large markets. And in smaller markets where the hours aren't as bad and where people aren't working as hard and so forth, I think that there's a lot less turnover. And I think that people tend to be happier in the long run and able to maintain a normal life. I think when you get into these large industrial law firms, which essentially are responding to the needs of large companies, then things are a little bit different. But I think that there are lifestyle firms. Most of the time, they're going to be outside of, they are in major markets as well, but a lot, when you get outside of major markets, I would say a lot of the firms are lifestyle firms compared to major markets. And I think that they can be more beneficial. When people practice, the stresses and the unpleasantness of practicing law in a lot of big cities is just related to the pressures and the need to provide a certain quality of service in a market where there's a lot of competition. So that's just how it works. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in smaller markets, it's just not the same, and the competition isn't the same. And many times that you're going to have a much better life. I think that when you look at all the turnover that happens in law firms, there's much less in smaller markets, many times, even bigger firms in smaller markets. And I think a lot of that is just because the firms tend to be less lifestyle firms or more lifestyle firms. Okay, let's see here. Would love to hear how you define a lifestyle firm. It seems so. No, this is actually a great question too. So we'd love to hear you define a lifestyle firm. So far, it seems to equal firms run by lazy people who don't care about their clients. No, I don't think that's true, but okay, would agree such a firm would have a hard time staying business. No, I don't think that lifestyle firm is necessarily run by lazy people, but I do think that there are some firms where the lifestyle is a priority and where people put their needs above necessarily those of the client. And that's fine. I'm not judging that one way or another. I'm thinking of an example of this is a lifestyle firm in LA that went out of business. There was the firm had a big trial coming up, and there was, I don't know, 3 or 4 people on the trial team. And then one of the attorneys on the trial team was the partner whose actually case it was. And there were other partners on the case too. There was another partner, and I knew the other partner that was on the case. And the partner that brought in the case, there was a trial that was starting on Monday, and they still had a bunch of things to do to prepare for the trial. And he said, "You guys are going to take care of it because I just refuse to work weekends, and I just won't do it." And that doesn't mean that he's lazy. It's just that those are his objectives. That's what he stands for, and that's fine, or what he stood for. But that firm, of course, didn't stay in business. So I don't think people that run lifestyle firms are necessarily lazy. I would say that the majority of firms in small to mid-sized markets of fewer than 30 or 40 people are going to be lifestyle firms. They're all, because the work is just not going to be extremely demanding. They may not even have enough work to keep you that busy, but that's just going to mean less compensation as well. I don't think it's that they don't care. I wouldn't say that a lifestyle firm is something that doesn't care about its clients. I think a lifestyle firm is often a firm that may not just have a ton of work, and they don't have a ton of work either because it's not available, or just because there's not a lot of as much work. When you go into markets outside of major cities, there's just, say you're a firm like in a small town in Pennsylvania, not a small town, but a town of maybe 25,000 people in Pennsylvania. You're working for a local hospital, some auto dealerships, maybe a company that manufactures motorcycle parts. Those types of law firms are not going to necessarily require you to work crazy hours. They're going to be what I would term sort of lifestyle firms. But it doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean that people there are lazy. It just means that they're just the type of work that they have is not there. So the drawback of working in a firm like that is that if you do go to work in a firm like that, you're not going to have as much, you're not going to be able to make as much money and as much long-term opportunity. But that's really the way that works. Okay. What is the difference in compensation between lifestyle firms and traditional law firms? So the difference can be dramatic. It can be very dramatic. A lifestyle firm, if it's a real lifestyle firm, it can be, you could make 30 to 100% less, or 30% to 50% less, meaning you can make a lot less money. You give up a lot going to a lot of lifestyle firms when they're traditional law firms, because you're joining a group of people that have essentially said, we're not going to work as hard, or we don't have enough work to work as hard. So I would say that when you're talking about lifestyle firms, I think the last question was very good, because we were talking about the firms are run by lazy people. And I don't think that's true. I think that a lot of firms are just lifestyle firms because they may not have enough work, or that the type of work that they do is not important enough that it's time sensitive and requires a lot of, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the compensation for going to one of these firms is always a lot less. And that's one reason why a lot of the hungriest law school graduates and the biggest schools and things will often go to much smaller, will go to firms that I would consider lifestyle firms, in big cities, not lifestyle firms. Okay, thank you for all the questions. I apologize for being sick today, but this was an interesting webinar, and I will be back next week and if there's more questions.